Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and obviously this isn't the second episode of Tinder Twigs. Unfortunately, there was a death of a friend of the family, and Guildmaz had to head out of town. So this week I'm going to be bringing you guys kind of like a filler episode to tide you over until my turn next week. Well, my turn next week. Anyway, I've been wanting to do top 10 style videos for a while now, and I decided now would be the perfect opportunity to go ahead and bring you one of the more lighter edited versions of one. And so today we're going to be talking about the top 6 games I want to run. Essentially, these are games that either I have only run for a couple of sessions or I've never really been able to get players for, but I've always wanted to, run a proper campaign of them. So without taking too much longer, let's go ahead and jump into it with number 1. Comes last. Number 6. Number 6 is Marvel Genesis. Now, this is a living world Mutants and Masterminds game that I actually ran back in Ohio with a friend. Some of you might have seen my battle reports from it in the playlist I have on the channel here. If not, go ahead and check them out afterwards. Now, essentially, this game took place in the Marvel Universe, where the Marvel Universe had been rebooted because of stuff that Kang the Conqueror and Doctor Doom did. Essentially, it got turned into this new continuity where heroes hadn't existed yet. And the type of stories that my friend and I could tell, the type of sessions we could run, would only be based on what heroes are introduced by players. Essentially, players could come, choose what heroes they wanted to run, and if that hero had not appeared yet, they had just had their origin story just prior to the adventure that they were playing now. Then future sessions would be based upon which heroes were introduced, because essentially we weren't allowed to use any villains from heroes that weren't introduced yet. So when a player brought in a new hero, it would kind of unlock all these different story elements for me and my friend to actually write into settings. So the world itself, the continuity, would actually build based off of player actions. Especially since we determined that the way we wanted to run this setting was that all death was final. So if a hero or a villain died, they died and would not be returning. There would be ramifications of their death, certainly, but none of this comic book, they die and 10 issues later they're back. There were some minor tweaks, but essentially it was similar to how the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, started up. S.H.I.E.L.D. was an international agency instead of just being an American agency, but they still gathered up the first set of superhuman heroes to appear in order to deal with large world-threatening events. For example, this got really interesting with the first set of Avengers comprising Captain America, Black Widow, the Punisher, Moon Knight, and Ghost Rider. So things got really interesting. Be sure to check out the battle reports if you're interested in this idea, but I would love to revisit this in the future and start up the living world again. Number 5 is the Sideshow Saloon, based off of the show on YouTube from Warlord of Noodles called the Sideshow Dance Club. Now, the basic concept of the Sideshow Saloon is that in the Old West, there is a saloon called the Sideshow Saloon, run by a Native American man who took the name of John North. Now, it's called the Sideshow Saloon because John North has traveled all over the Old West gathering oddities such as jackalopes and haunted things and just different curios and stuff that he puts on the walls of his saloon for people to look at, and everyone has a story he can tell. Now, what the patrons of his saloon don't know is that John North is actually the trickster Coyote, and that the staff of his saloon are various different mythological creatures posing as humans living there. Now, the basic setting is that all the mythological and folklore creatures of the world existed. It's just that humankind has stopped believing in them and kind of stripped them of a portion of their power. Now they're kind of living in a world where they're no longer respected or feared or anything like that, and they're just trying to get by without, tipping off humans and essentially being hunted to extinction. So the Sideshow Saloon actually exists as a bit of a refuge for mythological creatures trying to live in this new world without all their old mythological powers and things. For example, it was staffed by a Huldra singer, a satyr piano man, a couple of Valkyrie waitresses, a Einjar and Headless Horseman as bouncers, and even, well, like I said, even it was run by Coyote. Essentially, the basic concept of the game was that the players would, travel around the Old West dealing with various different supernatural happenings and meeting all sorts of mythological creatures, also trying to get by in the Old West while also running a successful business. If you're interested in the concept, I definitely recommend you check out the Just a Brick episode I did on it a while back. I'll make sure to put something in doobly-doo. And be sure to check out Warlord of Noodle's show, again, Sideshow Dance Club. It's definitely cool, and it's what all this is based off of. Number 4 is Project Emissary, which is pretty much my anime mecha setting for Mechton Zeta. The game would take place in a Gundam-like setting where humans have expanded and colonized the rest of the solar system. Now, Earth has united into a single government, but the rest of the solar system kind of exists still as like separate states, different nations and things, kind of just like how they were settled. They developed in their own nations and such. Now, Earth went and actually made first contact with an alien species. And the aliens, pretty much, their world is facing an impending doom. And what they propose is to send an arc ship to our solar system with an expeditionary force in order to settle a colony, to found a little colony and see if our species can coexist in our solar system since theirs is in danger. Now, Earth agrees to it, but then they decide that before the aliens get here, because it's going to take them quite a while, they really need to unify humanity. So the aliens don't arrive and there's multiple perspectives and things going on, different motivations in the solar system. So they go and they tell the rest of the solar system, hey, we need to unify as a species. And all the settlers and different rulers and stuff out in space go, and war breaks out. Pretty much it turns into two factions, just like in Gundam. You have the Earth forces, and then you have all the people out in space. They kind of unify under this conglomerate of corporations that are really powerful out there, and we get our two factions. Well, war goes on for a few years, and there's no end in sight by the time that the aliens are actually about to arrive. So the Earth government decides that, okay, we're not going to end this war in time, so what we need to do is we need to make sure that the aliens are kept separate from our enemies out in the rest of the solar system. So they gather a set of their best ace mecha pilots, give them a couple of ships, and then send them out to rendezvous with this alien vessel, pretty much to protect it from the enemies as well as to ensure that outside forces don't impose their perceptions of the solar system on the aliens. Essentially to keep the aliens aligned with Earth instead of this other faction. Now, there was a lot of potential with this that I had worked out, and I would love to run this setting sometime because I love anime or mecha anime. And there was lots of potential with essentially the other faction did know that the aliens were coming. They did manage to find out, so they were going to try and interfere. The Earth government wasn't entirely on the ball either because there's a conspiracy to ruin the experiment and make sure the aliens stay out of our solar system. And then also, the aliens themselves weren't completely upfront. So there was room for a lot of expansion of this and see where the players would take this. But definitely lots of good anime mecha fun, and I would love to run in the future. Poseidon by Night is number 3. It is a sandbox-style Vampire the Masquerade game that I ran for a couple sessions a while back. It took place in Poseidon, Arizona, which is a fictional city that is not as big as Phoenix, but large enough that it's a proper city. It's based around a reservoir and has a powerful water company in it that, it supplies all the surrounding cities with water and deals with water trade. the reason why I always want to run this game is because I put a lot of work into this setting. Since it was meant to be sandbox, it was going to be contained within this one city. But I went really in depth into the different groups and peoples there and the history of just this one city. I mean, as far as the vampire universe was concerned, this was a real backwater city where, you know, each of the clans, you know, the number of vampires in each clan could be counted on one hand. So when the players were brought into this as kind of the new generation of vampires called for by the prince, you know, they were going to have a lot of, you know, direct influence on what happened in this city. But I really did go in depth about the history. I went all the way back to the American Indian Wars, to the founding of the city. I talked about the various different vampire-controlled groups, such as corrupt cops, teenage graffiti gangs, bikers, the powerful water company I mentioned, a private defense not defense contract, but a private security firm, and even a technology institute that had a bit of a secret project that they were working on. Pretty much I developed all the different adventures that they could go on, and eventually they would have learned that outside their city, since they didn't have a lot of contact with the other cities, that the vampire world was coming to an end, and vampires were starting to die off, and they would have got to deal with that. Even though I put a lot of work into the setting, what really intrigued me about it that makes me want to try it again in the future is how I wanted to introduce players to the game. Since they were going to have so much influence on the game, and since this was kind of separated from the rest of the vampire world, I wanted to separate each of the players and take them through the process of how they're turned and how their sires educate them on how to be a vampire, what the vampire world is like, completely separately. Like, I took them aside one at a time and went through these with them. That way, you know, when they went through their education process, each of them had their own secrets and had their own perspectives of how the vampire world works. So when the players and the characters actually came together for the first time and for the rest of the game, they would actually have different perspectives to roleplay from, and I find that concept really interesting. I would like to try it again. Unfortunately, it failed because I didn't get past the education process because scheduling fell through, and, well, now I've moved away from that group. But it's something that I would definitely like to try again in the future, because I feel like even though that's reaching high, that would be definitely the best way to introduce characters in the setting. Now, number 2 is the World of Sar. This is a setting that I developed a while back for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5. Originally, I was going to tell like a Baldur's Gate sort of story, dealing with you know, inmates that are on death row being loaned to an archaeologist that needed protection, going to ruins and studying different things. But the main concept of this world, and the reason why I put so much effort into it, is that it's based around 2 continental empires. The Germanian Empire being led by humans, and the Tiamat Dominion, which is ruled over by chromatic dragons. Essentially, you had one continent full of primate-style races, like we're used to playing in D&D, and the other continent full of scaled races, such as dragonkin and kobolds and Yuan-Ti, that sort of thing. And even though there was no open hostilities between the 2 empires, they've both been involved in a very long Cold War, kind of just waiting to see who's going to throw the first punch. But I really put a lot of work into this setting, developing the different available races and their individual histories, and just all the different groups and things. It's a high magic setting, so there's a lot of commingled races. There's like adventuring guilds and that sort of thing. Kind of similar to Pathfinder Society. It's that developed of a setting. Well, not that developed like official Pathfinder, but I mean it's a developed setting that is similar to Pathfinder Society's official setting. Kind of some unique things that came out of the various racial histories and things that I liked about it were humans were a race that was magically created by elves to be a quick breeding soldier race, only to overthrow their masters and enslave the elves. Drow were a mostly good-aligned offshoot of High Elves, back when they still led an elven empire. And Tieflings, for example, are like this world's equivalent of gypsies. They're kind of homeless, but they are an actual race. I've run this setting a couple of times at cons, but I've never gotten to actually run it as a proper campaign. And it's something I'd really like to do, because I did put a lot of work into this, and I would like to explore some of the potentials in this setting, both with history and just with, the two empires thing going on. Now, originally, the World of Sar was actually going to be my number one, because of it is the setting that I've kind of put the most work into, and I've been wanting to do something with it for a long time. But there is still one more setting that I've always wanted to run that seems to be the most elusive. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Number one is Myst, as in the computer puzzle games. I've always liked Myst. I have the entire series on my shelf, and I just love those games. I love the setting and the concepts in the game. I find them so rich and full of potential for telling stories, but the problem that I've run into is that, number one, there's no role-playing game for it, at least that I've found. If you know that somebody out there has made one, please let me know. I am interested, but I have not seen one, and I kind of understand why. The Myst setting is, even though it's very rich and full of conflict, it's not the sort of setting that is traditional to role-playing games. Quite frankly, there's not a lot of combat. The games themselves, the video games, were designed around, using thought and solving the puzzles, logic, and one of the things that they, touted, one of the things that they bragged about was the fact that you could never die in the game. It was not a game about combat, though it had conflict in it. And I understand that can be kind of difficult to relate in tabletop role-playing games, but the setting is so rich that I would love to explore it. Essentially, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Myst is based around the concept that there was an ancient race from another world that developed the art, which is the process of creating, the process of being able to write books that are essentially become portals to the world described in the book. Essentially, it makes it that you can write worlds. There's a bit more to it than that, but it's this process of, if you know the art, you can create worlds and peoples, and you can go there through the physical book itself. And there's a lot to the history there about, the groups that originally discovered the art, there are different perceptions on it. There were bloody conflicts in the past in the history, but the setting itself is more about the whole exploring and the conflicts of the people who are able to do that. And it doesn't translate very well to a role-playing game that I've seen so far. I've used the concept in other settings. In fact, the World of Sar kind of incorporated that sort of concept into its history, but I've never been able to run a proper Myst game because it's hard to run it in universe. It's difficult because if you go modern time, there's no real conflicts because everything's kind of the series wrapped up, and even then, most of it was dealing with interpersonal conflicts in a single family. Not a lot of room to make lots of different characters. And on top of that, the games are kind of about exploring and solving puzzles. So even though it's a rich setting, there was not a lot to expand with it. So I don't know if it's something I've always wanted to run, but have never been able to bring together enough to actually build a proper setting. I've used the concept in a couple other places, but never been able to use that actual setting. I mean, for you guys out there, if you know of anyone who's actually done some work with that and, made themselves a nice homebrew Myst game, please let me know. I'm very much interested in, or even if you're Myst fans and you can see potential in how to make that setting into a role-playing game, please give me some comments down below. Let's discuss it, because I'm definitely interested in it. And you know, there's a lot of Myst fans out there. It's kind of a smaller community now, but they're avid fans. It's kind of like a little niche now. So guys, those are my top 6 games that I want to run. Now naturally, there are probably some other concepts that I would like to see turn into a game in the future, but I think every game master has just kind of like this endless bag of concepts that they think are cool and they would like to run at a con or as a campaign someday. But actually, by all means, if you guys want to share some of the games that you've never gotten to run or you didn't get to run to full fruition, or if you had any comments or questions about the settings that I talked about today, feel free to leave a comment below. Be sure to check out the videos that I mentioned below, because they're pretty cool, especially Warlord of Noodles video. She has some other shows that you might like. And you know what? We'll see you guys next time.